So, Graham Coffey, I was on my timeline, I guess it was yesterday evening or last night at some point, and I saw the development quotient. This is the graphic right here. We're going to be joined by Graham here momentarily. They caught my attention. Anything college football. The development quotient. And I'm going to let Graham discuss all of this. There's Georgia. They won it all. We know Ohio State. We know Cincinnati was a hell of a team. There's Baylor. That caught my attention at 11. So we cover them a lot. Oklahoma 13, among others. And Graham Coffey joins us now on Sikkim 365 Radio. You can find him at Dog Out West on Twitter. Graham, thanks for your time. What made you do that? First of all, what is it for those who are watching and listening? What is the development quotient?
Yeah, so basically every year, the month following the NFL draft, I get on social media and I see a lot of really dumb arguments or a lot of cherry-picked information around what program develops the best and all of that. Like Alabama signs, 10 5-stars a year, right? Like, of course, they're going to have a lot of first-round picks, but does that actually tell me that they're doing a good job of developing their talent? Not really, right? So the idea behind it was just to simplify the data that exists between recruiting rankings and NFL draft selections and try to come up with a number that is simplified, that'll just spit out, one number. And basically all this is looking at the 2015 through 2018 recruiting rankings for every school, and then seeing the 4-year average from the 2019 to 2022 NFL draft of what percentage of the pool of 5-star players, 4-star players, and 3-star players were selected. So basically just looking at, if over the course of 2019 to 2022, if you were a 5-star recruit, you had a 59.4% chance of being drafted in the NFL. And so with that baseline, we can then start looking at the composition of different programs' rosters and seeing, well, are they getting, 60% of their guys drafted? That's about average. Are they doing less? Are they doing more? And then doing that so on and so forth for 4-stars and 3-stars as well.
So who surprised you most on this list?
Probably Iowa,
yeah,
coming in at number 4. That one got me. Michigan surprised me at number 7 as well. Not that they haven't been a good program, but just there's usually a buddy of mine did a little project kind of looking at draft rate versus winning percentage, and there's usually a pretty good correlation there. And with Michigan, they've been a very strong program, but they always had that Ohio State kind of thorn in their side until this past season, and so that shocked me a little bit. But yeah, Iowa at a plus 9.9%, which basically just means they're getting guys drafted at a almost 10% greater rate than national averages. And you look at them, it's like they brought in 78 3-star recruits over that 4-year time period and put 15.3% of them in the NFL. And, they had a couple 4-star and 5-star guys as well, but that's the bulk of it is, the average number of 3-stars drafted over that time was just 6.3% of 3-stars being drafted. So that shocked me a little bit.
Graham, was there a program that made you think like, wow, they may talk a lot, but the numbers say otherwise as far as the development goes?
I mean, Florida State and USC were 68 and 69 on this list, which is as far as I actually took it down the wormhole. So, I mean, I know USC is excited to have Lincoln Riley in town and all of that, but they recruited pretty well under Clay Helton. They just didn't do anything with that talent. And then Florida State obviously has been a program in turmoil as well. But it is interesting. Texas A&M at number 41, Texas at 43, right? Like there's some big name programs in there that really aren't living up to the talent they're bringing in.
So is it better to, I'm trying to formulate this question.
Sure.
Are you looking at guys who like Georgia who brings them in and they pretty much keep? I mean, they had the plus rate obviously, but you kind of know you're going to Georgia, you're going to get a shot at the NFL. Or is it more impressive to be a team like Iowa or Cincinnati and really pop like that?
I think it just depends on your perspective, right? So, I mean, the key thing on this is the scores are weighted, right? So, if 60% of your roster is 3 stars, then how you develop 3 stars is 60% of your score. So it's not equivalent across the board. If you look at Georgia, really where they stood out the most was actually in what they did with the 3-star guys they took. They only recruited 31 from 2015 to 2018, but 10 of those guys went to the NFL draft. So, I think really there's definitely an evaluation piece of it, right? Like Iowa, they're in an area of the country that, let's be honest, like 24/7 Sports and Rivals and the recruiting websites, they don't have a ton of people going out to Iowa to watch high school football games. And so they've done a really good job. And Wisconsin as well is one of these teams where they've kind of been able to live under the radar, and maybe they know a guy is a very talented prospect, but the star rankings haven't picked up on it. So I think that's a little bit of the secret sauce. But yeah, I mean, Cincinnati was really impressive just in terms of how they took kind of, not just a team and went to the college football playoff, but the data in terms of what that team was made up of in terms of just raw recruiting rankings, there was nothing exceptional about it. So they either did a phenomenal job of evaluating or a phenomenal job of developing. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Graham, not having to do with your list, but just in general, I mean, obviously it's been quite the run for the Georgia Bulldogs. I mean, how about that NFL draft? I know the Kobe Dean slip was, kind of controversial and hotly debated, but my gosh, Kirby Smart can recruit, but he can also develop clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's funny. What really started me down this path was about a year ago following the NFL draft, there was a kind of subsection of Twitter that got into this whole Kirby Smart can't develop sort of narrative, which I thought was kind of silly looking at the raw data. But yeah, I think if you're Georgia right now and you want to go recruit a guy, maybe you just, send them a YouTube link of the draft and tell them to watch that and save yourself some gas on an in-home visit.
You saw Baylor, Graham, 2 years ago in the I guess it was 19 in the Sugar Bowl. Obviously, Georgia was men among boys, and Baylor also just wasn't quite ready for that. And then last year, what they did to Ole Miss, and your thoughts when you saw them at 11 and the quotient number, did that surprise you at all?
Not really, no. I mean, if you look at kind of the last, if you look at college football through the eyes of a recruit in this day and age, right? So a 17-year-old kid maybe remembers the last decade of college football, max, probably less than that, maybe 7 or 8 years. I mean, Baylor's probably been the most consistent team in the Southwest kind of over that time. Obviously there's the gap here with Jim Grobe following the fallout of the Bryles deal, but I do think Baylor has been really consistent, and it's not just they've been consistent under one guy. They've done it under 3 different coaches now. And so I think what's interesting from an outsider's perspective, obviously you guys cover the school, but it's curious looking at it. Georgia, I get why Georgia recruits well. There's a ton of money being poured into it. There's resources and all of that. But, Baylor, for most of my lifetime was a really downtrodden program. And sometimes you see those schools kind of, Arizona went to a BCS bowl, right, under Rich Rod. Like you see those kind of 1 to 2 year little jumps, but Baylor has managed to maintain that, consistency that is actually surpassing the kind of quote unquote blue blood programs in the SEC and the Big Ten. Like Baylor has really just had a consistent output, and that's mirrored in their NFL draft selections as well.
Graham, is this something you hope to, or you plan on continue doing? Because I do think this is something that does answer. I mean, the idea is brilliant because, the NFL stuff, you can kind of massage those numbers, but this is pretty clear cut on who's what and who's doing what. Is this something that you plan to make a regular feature each year?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I definitely want to continue it out. You were talking about Georgia earlier. It's like a lot of the guys they had drafted this past week were in the class of 2019, which this hasn't even touched yet. this exercise is gonna be harder and harder to do every year because of the transfer portal.
Yeah.
So there's gonna be some areas where it's like I have to make a judgment call of who really developed this guy. Was it the school he was at for 4 years, or the school that he was at when he was drafted, or whatever. So there is going to have to be a little subjectivity to it, but I definitely think it fills a need because we have a lot of good metrics for college football in terms of what happens on the field. But for as much conversation as exists around the draft and recruiting, there's not too many people working with numbers that correlate the two. So I'm definitely interested to see kind of where the patterns go in the coming years.
Most of the NIL, Graham, and I want to let you go. We appreciate your time again. At Dog Out West, DAWG Out West. I saw your response to the Brew McCoy commitment to Tennessee, and you mentioned all the money, NIL, star receivers, quarterbacks. I feel like if that money was spent on the offensive line or the line of scrimmage, is what you said, then UT gets scarier to face. Is too much being made of the bells and whistles and not the core, the meat of a football team?
I think so, 100%. I mean, don't get me wrong, like quarterback stats and receiving yards and all of that, they're glitzy and they make guys Heisman candidates and all of that good stuff. But you look at Georgia's team last year, it's like that was a meat and potatoes, really strong on the offensive line, obviously an extremely dominant front seven. In the case of Tennessee in particular, they're a team that kind of runs that old Dryl style offense, right? Where it's like I feel like I can plug in kind of any 3-star receiver and the system is going to elevate that level of play. There's just not a huge, I think, delta between a 5-star guy and a little bit lower rated guy and in an offense like that. But if you look at Tennessee and the games they lost last year, there's a big thing missing on their offensive line and their defensive line. And I do think, even though we've kind of gotten the spread era and we had 2019 with LSU and Burrow and then 2020 with Jones, you're kind of seeing the pendulum swing back a little bit. Defense and line of scrimmage still wins championships. And the overlooked thing about that LSU team and that Alabama team was that they had phenomenal offensive lines that gave those guys tons of time to let those receivers break open.
Graham, thank you. On the chat room from Eric, this is truly damning chart if your name's not on it. And we just showed the main page. We're going to see, in fact, Armstrong, I don't know if you can or not, the others that are on top of that. There's all the way down, as he mentions, in the 40s and 50s or whatever. Keep it up, man. I love this stuff. I love the analytics, but just stats and trends and obviously college football, the landscape changing dramatically, and I'm glad it popped up on my timeline. I'm glad we got you on the show. Appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me on, and hopefully look forward to talking to you again down the road.
Yeah, maybe at some point there's a game between Georgia and Baylor. That would be great news for Baylor because we know where Georgia's going to be over the next several years as well. Graham Coffey at Dog, DAWG Out West, also covers Georgia, but the developmental quotient is what he calls it.
Well, I'm not surprised that Baylor ranked pretty high after the weekend that they just had. I mean, a lot of those guys, some of them were 4 stars, but a lot of them were 3 stars. And, obviously you end up with 6 draft picks. That's pretty good turnover on your classes. So I'd expect next year they're going to have a pretty healthy number. Might not be as jam-packed in the first and second rounds, in the second and third rounds as it was this year, but they should have a healthy number. And yeah, it's just interesting to see kind of who's actually doing something with their talent. But I do worry because he just mentioned it there, like who gets credit for Jordan Addison? Pitt, who had him for 3 years, or whichever school lands him and sends him to the draft, which is like the only way that you don't do that is if you massively screw him up somehow, because he could leave right now and be a top pick. So, that's going to be kind of hard to figure out a way to judge that. That's why I'm, not capable of putting together such a chart.
I think if a guy wins a Biletnikoff somewhere, then they get the credit.
Yeah, but it didn't, and I thought Tony Altomare mentioned this.